It's 6 o'clock. I'm Jonathan Samuels. This is the News Hour, 60 minutes of news, analysis and interviews. The top stories.
What do you feel about being kicked out of the Tory party, Lee?
Islamophobia row. The Deputy Prime Minister tells Sky News MP Lee Anderson's comments about London Mayor Sadiq Khan were wrong, but not racist. President Zelensky says he's confident he'll get the military aid he needs from his allies and says 31,000 Ukrainian troops have died in the war so far. HS2 savings. The Prime Minister prepares to set out how they'll spend billions of pounds from scrapping part of the high-speed rail link. Donald Trump defeats his Republican rival in her home state, closing the gap on the race to be the party's presidential nominee. Oppenheimer cements its status as an Oscars front runner after more success at the Screen Actors Guild Awards. In sport, Liverpool beat Chelsea in extra time to win the League Cup final at Wembley. Good evening, welcome to the News Hour. The Prime Minister's second-in-command did little to diffuse a deepening row over allegations of Islamophobia within the Conservative Party today. Speaking to Sky News, the Deputy Prime Minister, Oliver Dowden, said Lee Anderson's comments about the London Mayor Sadiq Khan were wrong, but refused to describe them as racist. The Muslim Council of Britain has called for an investigation into what it alleges is structural Islamophobia in the party. Well, Lee Anderson had the Tory whip withdrawn from him yesterday after refusing to apologise for saying that the Mayor of London was controlled by Islamists. Mr Anderson was seen today in his Nottinghamshire constituency, but didn't answer questions put to him by reporters. Instead, soon after leaving his house, he tweeted this photo, writing, "In the dog house, it's a pub, a random lady called Sue called in yesterday and left a £5 behind the bar to get me a pint. I don't know you, Sue, but cheers." Well, in a moment, we'll hear from Conservatives calling for a change in approach. But first, this is what the Deputy Prime Minister told Sky's Trevor Phillips. He also challenged Oliver Dowden over controversial comments made by the former Home Secretary, Suella Braverman.
The question I asked you is does the Conservative Party's suspension of Mr Anderson mean that at least he is suspected of being a racist?
Well, what the words that he chose to use were not the right words to use. They were the wrong words, and words do matter. And he was given that opportunity to apologise, and he didn't. So I do not accept the words that he used. He shouldn't have used those words, and that's why, having failed to apologise, we have withdrawn the whip. Now, when it comes to the wording used by individual Conservatives, I've said that I disagreed with the language used by Lee Anderson. It was right for him to apologise, and his failure to apologise meant that we had the whip withdrawn. I don't believe that the language used by Suella Braverman has crossed the line whereby she should apologise for it. No, I don't.
Well, this afternoon, former Minister Sir Robert Buckland told Sky News that, as it stands, the disgraced MP should not stand as a Tory at the next election.
I can't see how that can be the case. If Mr Anderson does recant and apologise and explain why now he accepts that the remarks were wrong, then that might be a different matter. But he hasn't done that. He has made some reasonable remarks in his explanation about understanding the position of the Prime Minister and the party, but he's going to have to do a lot more than that, it seems to me, if he stands any chance of being a Conservative candidate. So as things stand, I can't see how that could happen.
Well, our political correspondent, Matthew Thompson, is in Harrow East, which is one of the few Conservative-held seats with a large number of Muslim voters.
I think two other things are causing consternation today. One is a statement from the Prime Minister himself yesterday in which he condemned racism and anti-Semitism, but made no reference to this, Roy, and absolutely no mention whatsoever of Islamophobia. And then the other thing that people are getting rather vexed about today is the reasoning behind the removal of the whip from Lee Anderson, is that it appears not to have been because the comments themselves were beyond the pale, but rather because he failed to apologise. The implication, therefore, being that had he said sorry, then this would all be okay. And there's a really interesting parallel. If we go back to Labour's problems over the Rochdale by-election. You might remember, before they suspended their candidate, Azhar Ali, for anti-Semitic comments they made, they initially stuck by him and said that, well, he'd apologised for those comments. And for that position, they were monstered by the Conservative Party. So which is it? Is it okay if they're apologised for or not? And what it does, I suppose, is after weeks of the Conservative Party attacking Labour over anti-Semitism, it means that they're now less able to speak with the moral authority on racism, and that attack line is blunted, if you like. And what was really striking was perhaps some of the most strident criticism today came from within the Conservative Party. Here's Baroness Saeeda Varsi speaking to Sky News earlier today.
It's really disturbing that in the Conservative Party, in the current Conservative Party, not only is there now a hierarchy of racism, but anti-Muslim racism is being used as an electoral campaign tool. It's almost being seen as Muslims are now fair game, that they don't matter. And this is dangerous because once a mainstream political party starts to peddle conspiracy theories and start using the language of the far and the extreme right, that is not just disturbing for a political party, but it's a disturbing day for democracy.
As you say, we're here in northwest London in one of the very few seats in the country, Tory-held seats, with a sizable Muslim majority. And the few Muslims we've spoken to today are angry, upset. But what they see as yet more evidence of Islamophobia from the Conservative Party. For example, Boris Johnson's infamous letterbox comments were raised a number of times unprompted, and people we spoke to here had no intentions of voting Conservative. But the fact of the matter is very few Muslims actually do. A recent Survation poll suggests that it was just around 8%. So if you want to look at this in more purely electoral terms, I think the greater risk to the Conservatives might be from the perception that what was once branded the nasty party, you might remember Theresa May's infamous phrasing, is still capable of saying some fairly nasty things.
Well, we can now hear from some of those voters in West London that Matthew Thompson's been speaking to today.
It's very saddening to hear something from somebody like that, and I think he should apologise to the whole Muslim community for what he said. And then it's not acceptable at all.
They should calm things down. It's in their hand. So major politicians are giving comments like that is only going to, obviously these little groups of people who are racially motivated, they're going to even be pumped up more, and it will cause more issues for our masjid, for example, this community here.
Our other main story this evening, the Ukrainian president has told a news conference he feels positive about further military aid being supplied by its allies. Volodymyr Zelensky said he's sure the United States will approve aid for his country. He also said that 31,000 Ukrainian soldiers had been killed since the Russian invasion 2 years ago.
We've just come back from the front at Kupiansk. So I wanted to ask you, will Ukraine lose ground? Will it lose territory to Russia this year? Are you prepared to cede territory as you attempt to rearm, to re-equip the Ukrainian military?
We have reduced their advantage, but they still have a significant advantage. And we need to reach the point where we are able to conduct a counter-offensive. Until we reach that point, we will continue to lose 100, 150 meters. Unfortunately, it is important But strategically, it is more important not to lose people. We need to put pressure on the partners regarding the packages that had already been agreed.
Well, with me in the studio is our military analyst, Sean Bell. Good to see you again, Sean. I know you watched the whole of that news conference, and it was pretty interesting, wasn't it? As much for what he had to say as for his tone, which is different, isn't it, to what we witnessed a year ago and what we witnessed even 2 years ago.
You're exactly right, Jonathan. There's lots of detail that flows out these conferences, but I was particularly struck about it wasn't what he said, but how he said it, the body language around that. You know, a year ago, he was much more firebrand, much more defiant. He was talking about victory that eventually gives the tools and I'll sweep Russia out of Ukraine. Whereas today, it felt much more statesmanlike, much more measured. He didn't really talk about Ukrainian victory so much as not losing. And there are really subtleties there because that alludes the potential for compromise rather than absolute victory. President Zelensky's got a really difficult situation he's got to navigate here because clearly he's got to inspire his nation. He can't be defeatist. If you're going to negotiate, you've got to negotiate from a position of strength. But he also knows that, you know, the whole prospect of losing, he said, Ukraine would cease to exist. So in other words, he's alluding to the fact there might be a future where Ukraine does exist, but maybe not with the same territory it had at the start of the war. He talked about domestic security being really important in an interim basis before Ukraine could join NATO. He was very clear about thanking France and others for providing some security guarantees along the way. But I was very struck this felt like a much more philosophical Zelensky doing grand statesmanship rather than the tactical firebrand.
Yeah, because there's been so much rhetoric in the past, hasn't there, about reclaiming, every inch of land that's been taken, and we didn't hear so much of that today. And John Sparks, his question, what did you make of the response to that?
Yeah, well, John was talking about, would you be prepared to cede territory as you await the arrival of weapons? Now, it's a really difficult question to ask anybody. Nobody wants to cede territory. But the harsh reality here is that Ukraine is smaller than Russia. It can't get trapped into a war of attrition. The advantage that the West has provided is precision strike weapons that allows Ukraine to prevail on the battlefield. And President Zelensky was very clear to the West. It was a challenge. Give me the weapons, otherwise I'm going to struggle. And we've got a graphic here that tries to bring a bit of life to this. The EU has recently approved a very large slug of money to support Ukraine, but it's less about the money, it's more weapons. That's what they need on the front line today. And if you look at the red slug at the left, it's a relatively small proportion of military support. If you look at the US, where currently 60 billion is locked up in Congress, that's where the lion's share of weapons comes from, not just from their industry, but also from stockpiles. And one of the challenges faced in all of this conflict is these weapons are not available on the shelf. Russia has already industrialized the warfare. It's setting its factories loose to start producing more. In the West, in World War II, the last time we did industrial level of warfare, we had factories producing Spitfires, guns, ammunition, stuff like that, in the quantities you need to win a war. It's not evident that that's happening in the West at the moment, and that's going to cause President Zelensky some problems in the future if the West doesn't step up.
Yeah, talking about the future then, just very briefly, Sean, where are things heading? From what you've been saying, it sounds as if maybe we could be entering to negotiation territory over the next 12 months.
Well, the trouble is negotiation happens when both sides are ready for it, and it seems very unlikely that President Putin will be keen for this. I have to say, a year ago, we were looking more positively about the spring offensive. I have to say most pundits at the moment are seeing this a much more difficult year ahead for Ukraine.
OK. Sean, as always, thank you.